The forest was quiet, which should have been Liora's first warning. Silence in the Evershade was never natural. It meant that something with sharp teeth and ugly intentions had convinced even the wind to hold its breath. She heard it anyway, the kind of hush that feels like a hand over the mouth, and kept walking because exhaustion was a loud drum and hope was a whisper. She had spent 3 weeks crossing the borderlands, trading her healing for bread and a blanket, moving between packs that would take her skills and return suspicion. Liora's hair was a silver-black tangle that looked like starlight spilled on charcoal. Her skin carried the fine, pale freckles, some called moondust. Her eyes were grey-shot with flecks of blue, clear and unblinking, in a way people found unsettling. Not albino, the midwives had said. Not cursed, the priests had argued. Just different. The world had decided. And for wolves, different was dangerous. She should have stopped at dusk. The nearest hamlet was a day's walk, but sleeping alone had never scared her. She had been doing it since she was 16, when raiders burned her village and the pack elders had watched smoke rise like a prayer and declared that the strange-eyed girl was bad luck. They had offered her a satchel, a waterskin and a direction. She had taken all 3 and learned how to stitch wounds in the dark. The cry shattered the silence like glass. High, thin, frantic. A pup? No. A wolf cub. Liora froze. Cub meant mother. Mother meant teeth. But the cry came again, weaker now, edged with a whimper that sliced straight through her. Her gift, the sense that tasted pain like iron on the tongue, flared so hard her knees went soft, hurt, deep. Now, she cut through underbrush and came to a hollow where a storm-blasted oak draped its skeleton arms over moss. The cub was small enough to fit across her 2 palms, a white-furred scrap with blood matting the down along his back. One hind leg bent wrong, claw marks like red rivers. He dragged himself toward a tangle of roots as 3 wolves, rogues by their scars and the sour stench of untended rage, stalked him in a lazy arc. This wasn't a hunt. This was cruelty passing the time. Stop. The word left her mouth before the sense could leave her mind. 3 grey heads lifted, gold eyes narrowed. One wolf shifted, bones running like water, fur withdrawing into flesh. The man who stood up was big, with a crooked nose and a smile that had never met kindness. "What's this?" he said, raking his gaze down her travel-worn coat. A stray little omega, alone, pretty in a wrong-looking way. He tilted his head toward the cub and snorted. "And the moon smiles twice. The little bloomling prince, gift whelp of the north. Kill him and the king howls. Take you and maybe the howl sounds like a song." Prince, Liora thought, her stomach dropping. White fur, the old lines always bred true. "Leave him," she said, keeping her voice flat because fear could smell. "Walk away and live." The 2 remaining wolves shifted too, flanking her. "Or what?" the leader asked. "You'll glare me to death?" "No." She slid the bone-handled knife from her belt. It was small, kept sharp and more memory than weapon. "I'll try very hard." The fight was sweat and grit and bad luck. Liora was not a warrior. She knew how to pry arrowheads from flesh, and how much foxglove could slow a heart without stopping it. But rage made her hands quick. The first rogue lunged, expecting a flinch. She didn't. She stepped in, turned her wrist, and let the blade find softness beneath the jaw where vein meets air. He went down gurgling, shock painting his face like a child's smear of ash. The second caught her from the side. Claws raked across her ribs, cloth tore. Heat bloomed, then fell away into a scary coolness. She slammed an elbow back, heard cartilage crack, levered her heel down his instep, and buried the knife under his collarbone until bone stopped the blade. He screamed and went boneless. She almost joined him. The third shifted mid-leap and hit her as a wolf with a soldier's weight. Teeth sank into her shoulder. Something popped. The knife went skittering. He shook her once like she was a rag he didn't like the color of, and the world tilted. He threw her into the oak. She slid down bark and ended on roots that felt like knuckles. The wolf turned from her and started toward the cub. No, the word wasn't a sound. It was a pull. Liora's gift, usually a gentle map of pain and balance, roared open like a door in a storm. She had always been careful. "Save your own breath," her mother had whispered over the grinding stone when she taught Liora to mix salves. "Do not spend your heart on a stranger." Carefulness was a luxury for people who belonged somewhere. She reached past the neat basin of strength she kept for healing, and found the wild river. Heartbinding, the old stories called it. The forbidden thread that ran through all living things. She dug her fingers into it and pulled. Life moved. Not like water. Like light ripped from dawn. The wolf stumbled mid-step, grey fur frosting white near his muzzle, joints stiffening under the weight of years he had not yet lived. He collapsed, breathing once like a bellows that had found a nail and then not breathing again. The backlash hit her like a hammer to the chest. The storm door she had kicked open slapped back and took something with it. She felt herself falling sideways in her body. The gift screamed a litany of damage. 2 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a shoulder shattered like pottery, internal bleeding that bloomed cold and petal fast. The cub looked at her with wide, frightened blue eyes. Up close he was beautiful in the startling way of things that should have died but hadn't. He whined, small and brave. "Hey, little brave," Liora whispered. Her voice sounded far away, as if it belonged to a girl in another clearing. "It's going to be strange for a moment. Then better." She put both hands on his side and called the thread again. Not from the forest, not from the dead, but from herself. She poured. She poured until she wasn't sure her body was a place but a bridge. Bones slid into their sockets with a satisfying, almost audible relief. Skin drew closed. Fur grew like frost in reverse. The cub's breath evened. His pain dimmed to a distant ringing and then to nothing. The edges of the world went dark and grainy. "Good," she slurred, smiling because the cub was licking her fingers with concentrated gratitude. "You're fine. Somebody important is going to lose their mind with relief." She tried to breathe and couldn't quite find the motion. "I think I'm done." The cub sat back on his healed haunches, threw his head up, and howled, a note so pure, it felt like glass held up to sunlight. The sound ran through the trees in a ripple, as if the forest were water, and someone had dropped a stone, with the king's name carved in it. Wolves came. Not the kind from packs. The old kind, moon-white sentinels who lived where the Evershade grew so thick that noon looked like dusk. They slipped between trunks, silver eyes bright, forming a watchful ring around the girl and the cub. They did not touch her. They didn't need to. The air around Liora hummed with the ozone of spent power. The old ones recognized a heartbinder when the gift still crackled, like lightning over her skin. More wolves broke through the brush a breath later, much larger, and wearing the cold, clean scent of discipline. Royal Guard. At their center ran a wolf the size of a warhorse, fur white as breath, eyes blue as glacier ice. He threw himself to a halt, shifted mid-stride, and stood, tall, broad-shouldered, hair pale gold, blood spattered, alive with a terrible, contained fear that looked a lot like love. "Mate." The bond slammed into him like a storm dropping out of a clear sky. It wasn't a whisper or a question. It was a knowing that lived beneath language. "Mine." The word lit in his bones. Darian Thorn, Alpha King of Veer, dropped to his knees beside her without thinking. He reached, then stopped, because he was afraid that touching might tip the scales the wrong way. "Healers," he said, and did not need to raise his voice. The guard were already moving. The cub, Rowan, butted his small head against the woman's arm, whining as if the sound could stitch skin. Darian curled a hand around his son automatically, breathing him in. Not a scratch. Relief hit so hard his vision went bright at the edges. He looked back at the woman. She was younger than he was prepared for. 23 perhaps, with a mouth shaped for stubbornness, and a brow that suggested she asked too many questions, and never the ones people wanted. "Heartbinder," Darian breathed. He could taste the echo of the gift in the air the way a blacksmith can smell rain before it hits the hearth. "And mine." The healers arrived. Vera, whose hands never shook. 2 more whose names Darian would recall later, and bless in his evening prayers. They were already sweating before they laid hands on Liora. "Your Majesty," Vera said carefully after a swift assessment, "she is hanging by threads. If I pull one wrong—" "Then we weave more threads," Darian said, and his voice was a blade in a scabbard. "Do not let her die." They worked. Magic bloomed soft and golden under their palms. They stopped the bleeding inside first, wrapped the torn lung in light until it remembered how to rise, set the shoulder with a clean, vicious snap, and a mark of power to hold it. Minutes stretched into rope. At last, Vera sat back, face gone sallow with effort. "She lives," she said. "For now." "Then she lives," Darian answered. He looked at the cub, tucked against the woman's side. Tiny fingers now instead of paws splayed over her wrist because Rowan had shifted in his panic. "We go home." The journey to the Frostkeep took 2 days and a year. They built a litter that floated on light, carried it as if a misstep could break a kingdom. The wild sentinels followed unseen and constant as moonrise. Darian barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of a grey-flecked gaze, opening and seeing him, and not liking the sight. They learned her name from papers in her satchel: Liora Ashvale, born to Mara and Etan of the River Vale, deceased, no pack marked, no living kin. There was a small leather book full of neat notes in a precise hand, Mara's, by the dedication on the first page, and a knife that was old enough to have loved someone longer than Liora had been alive. He put the knife beside her pallet in her rooms when they reached the Frostkeep. He posted healers in shifts. He ordered the kitchens to send up broths for a mouth that could not yet swallow, and a tray of honeycakes for a child who had known a bad day and needed to understand that goodness still existed. Rowan slept, curled on a cot beside Leora's bed with one hand fisted in her blanket, as if he could anchor her back. 6 dawnfalls later, she opened her eyes. Darian was there because he was always there, pretending to read reports and actually counting her breaths. Her gaze was clouded at first, then sharp, then wary. She tried to sit. Pain pinned her back. "Easy," he said softly. "You're safe. You're in the Frostkeep. You've been unconscious for 6 days." "The cub?" Her voice was dry riverbed. "Is he?" "He's Rowan," Darian said, "because names steady souls. He is perfectly fine because of you, and he is right here." He gestured to the cot where his son had managed to sleep with his fingers still tangled in Leora's blanket. At the sound of his name, Rowan stirred, rubbed his face, and sat up with the dizzy joy of 2 years old. "You're awake," he announced, climbing carefully onto the bed, the way he had been taught to be gentle with new puppies and precious things. He wrapped his arms around her neck with fierce gratitude. "Thank you. The bad wolves were bad. You made them stop. Are you my snow lady?" "I like snow." Liora made a sound that wanted to be a laugh, and was half a sob. She pat the child's back with a hand that shook. "I like snow too." Darian watched relief move through him like warmth after a long march. He waited until Rowan settled beside Liora with his head on her arm and his thumb in his mouth, a comfort he was supposed to be aging past and which no one was going to mention today. Then said, "I am Darian Thorn, Alpha King of Vir. The cub you saved is my son and heir. The gift you used is called Heartbinding. It has not been seen in 300 years. Her eyes widened. "I didn't mean to use anything forbidden. I didn't want him to die." "That," Darian said, "is exactly why the gift chose you." He let the next words sit between them until they felt like truth, and not a demand. "There is something else. When I found you in the clearing, the bond struck. You are my true mate." She went still in the specific way of someone who has learned to survive, by not moving until the trouble decides where to bite. "That makes no sense," she whispered. "I am no one. You are the woman who gave your life to save a child. You did not know," Darian said quietly. "You are the only Heartbinder living. You are the person my son reached for in his sleep, before he knew your name. That seems like someone." He did not reach for her hand. He wanted to. He did not. "I will not ask you for an answer now, or tomorrow. I will ask you for rest, for food, for time. All else will wait." It turned out that time wanted company. Rowan had no interest in boundaries. He adopted Liora with a toddler's absolute logic. The person who saved me is mine. He tracked her through the keep like a moon follows tide. At first, Liora was stiff with him, unsure of the rules. Rules bent around children. So did Liora. She healed in layers. Bone, then muscle, then the thin places in a life where rejection had rubbed her raw. She learned the heartbinding as something other than a last stand. Not a theft or a sacrifice, but a weaving. With Vera's help and old texts brought from the archives, she practiced drawing on the forest's overflow, on the quiet pulse of a river, on the way a pack's shared breath could be a net stronger than rope. She mended a guardsman's knee, without spending more than a pinprick of her own strength. She eased the nightmares that had grown like mold in a widow's chest. And on a rain-silvered night when Rowan woke screaming for a mother he had never known, Liora sat on the edge of his bed and pressed her palm to his temple. She did not steal pain. She smoothed it like a hand over rumpled sheets, until the boy's breath came easy. Darian watched. He helped. He stayed out of the way when staying out of the way was the kindest thing a king could do. He brought Liora books about far kingdoms, because she said she had never traveled beyond the borderlands. He brought her a pair of soft leather boots, because the stone floors caught cold at night. He did not bring flowers, because everyone brought flowers, and he suspected Liora liked things that stayed useful after the pollen fell. 3 months after the oak and the blood, Darian found Liora and Rowan in the winter garden, which was not winter at all, but a warm, glass-roofed square where medicinals grew in careful beds. Rowan wove crowns out of rosemary sprigs. Liora showed him how to braid stems so they would not break. The air smelled like rain that had made up its mind to forgive. "For you," Rowan said when he saw his father, holding up a lopsided wreath. "I made it, with my hands." Darian bent his head to accept the gift, and came away smelling like soup and summer. "Perfect," he said gravely. Then he sat beside Liora on the stone bench, close enough to share warmth, far enough to show he knew where the edge was. "He loves you," he said quietly, "not because of magic, because you are gentle when he fails, and fierce when he is afraid." "I love him," Liora said, as if surprised by the discovery and sure of it anyway. "I did not think I would be anyone's mother. I did not think I would be anyone's anything." "You could be his mother," Darian said, "if you wish. You could be my equal and Luna, if you wish. Or you could be Liora of Ash and Vale who lives in the keep and teaches the healers, and takes my son's hand when he jumps puddles, if you wish. The bond is a door, not a chain." She looked at him for a long, patient moment, as if reading a text written in a language she had only just learned. "I feel it now," she said at last, very soft. "The pull. I am afraid of wanting." "Wanting is the first honest thing," Darian said, and then shut his mouth because he could feel his wolf lining up speeches. "Take your time." She did. A month later she came to his study with her hair plaited back and her hands steady. "I have decided," she said without preface. "I do not want to be alone anymore. I want this." She took his hand, lifted it, and pressed her lips to his knuckles. It was a small kiss. It unmade him. He asked anyway, because consent is a magic older than any gift. "Are you certain?" "Yes," she said, and rose on her toes to kiss him properly. The mate bond flared between them, not like lightning now, but like a hearth thoughtfully laid and finally lit. Heat did not cease, it spread. When they broke apart, both breathing like they had run a hill, Liora smiled in a way that said, terror and joy were not enemies. "I want to be Rowan's mother," she said. "And your mate, and the Luna of this pack. I want to be somewhere on purpose." "Then be here," Darian whispered. "For as long as we breathe." They held the mating under a full moon in the courtyard, where the old stones remembered every promise ever spoken on them. Packs came from neighboring lands. The court gathered in colors that looked like jewels spilled over snow. And from the Evershade, the moon-white sentinels walked out of legend and circled the ceremony, heads high, eyes like quiet winter. Vera spoke the words. Rowan carried the rings with the gravity of a child who understood that small things can be heavy. He nearly dropped them twice and grinned fierce as a fox when he did not drop them the third time. When Darian marked Liora and Liora marked him, the bond settled with the satisfying click of a lock closing on the right chest. Not ownership. Belonging. Not the end of the run. The turning point where two paths decide they prefer to be a road. Afterward, Rowan threw his arms around Leora's neck. "Are you my mother now?" he asked, eyes wide with hope and cake. "If you want me," Liora said, kneeling to his height so truth could travel the shortest distance. "I want," Rowan declared, and that was that. Years turned like pages. The story did not stop being hard. No story worth telling does. There were winters with more teeth than meat, disputes at borders that required patience, and occasionally a very large dog form. Illnesses that needed new weavings because old weavings did not fit new wounds. Leora's gift grew. She learned to shore up a soldier's courage before a siege without dimming his caution. She learned to ease a queen's fear of childbirth without stealing the good fear that keeps hands steady and breath deep. She taught the healers that heartbinding wasn't a trumpet to be blown in crisis, but a lute to be tuned daily. When Rowan was old enough to train with the guard, he came home with bruised shins and big opinions. He asked Liora about the oak and the blood. "Why did you risk everything for someone you did not know?" he asked, sincere as only the young and the honest can be. "You were crying," Liora said, tucking a lock of hair behind his ear. "The moment I heard you, you became mine. Family is not always blood, Rowan, but it is always a choice." She smiled then, that small, bright smile Darian had first read correctly and built a kingdom around. "You and your father gave me something back. A house. A name that means welcome. A place where my hands are useful. I think that is what the gift was waiting for. Somewhere to root." In time, when Rowan stood in the great hall with a beater's hand on his shoulder and a crown that would one day be his resting light as a promise, he spoke the law he had learned from the ghost girl who was no ghost. "Strength is not how loud we roar," he said. "Strength is how much we willingly lay down so the smallest among us can sleep." The court took that down in their books, and the people took it down in their bones. Generations later, when the heartbinding stirred in a child with eyes like rain over stone and laugh like a bell, the moon-white sentinels walked out of the Evershade again to stand watch. They always came for Leora's line, not because the gift belonged to the crown, but because the crown had learned, at a bloodied oak, on a quiet night, to belong back. If you enjoy stories where outcasts choose family, alpha kings choose patience, and old magic chooses the brave, stay close. There are more tales in the Evershade, and the forest only falls quiet when something worth hearing is about to begin.